Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's a big week for Canadian students with the bulk going back to school. This year's list of school supplies includes a mask, and the final touches are being put on classrooms to make them as safe as possible in a pandemic. But there is growing anxiety about how it will all unfold. Nobody knows if classrooms will actually be a return to normal or if they'll promote the spread of COVID-19. But as Ross Lord reports in our top story tonight, we do know it'll be a huge adjustment with the potential for even more disruption.
For many Canadians, back-to-school shopping includes a search for reassurance.
Everybody's trying to make the best of it.
But fear of the unknown is lurking.
Yeah, concerned about another breakout for sure. Yeah, and then concerned that kids will all be home, concerned about what's that going to do for people working. Yeah, really worried about that.
I'm interested to see how everybody's gonna work with having to be socially distanced while we're learning and paying attention to other things other than coronavirus.
Leaders offer reassurances classes can resume safely with an emphasis on masks and distancing where possible.
We have really done whatever we can to protect our kids, but it's time to get back and move on with COVID.
But does moving on with COVID in the same classrooms as before mean exposing students and school staff to the virus?
I have 22 kids in my room. I have them about 60 centimeters apart. So that's significantly less than we know or we've been told is safe.
Carrie Vino suggests teachers in Nova Scotia are receiving mixed messages.
I have one teacher who thinks that their children don't ever have to wear masks, and another teacher who thinks, no, they do have to wear masks in the hallways.
There's early evidence from Quebec. Classes there have already resumed. 47 schools have reported COVID-19 cases. So far, there's no indication the virus is spreading within schools. But for the weeks and months ahead, some disease researchers anticipate disruptions.
I actually expect there to be some school closures somewhere in the country before this semester is out, because I don't have a lot of confidence in many provincial governments' commitment to what needs to be done.
Not to mention the pressure on Canadian students, teachers and families to practice enough self-control to prevent caseloads from climbing. Ross Lord, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Caseloads are climbing in Quebec. For the second straight day, the province has recorded more than 200 new infections. East of Montreal, 2 bars owned by the same person are suspected to have violated public health guidelines. Police say they had to intervene over the weekend at both places. At one of them, police allege patrons weren't following physical distancing rules, dancing too closely, and some not wearing masks. The owner, who says he's doing everything he can to ensure regulations are respected, could face a fine. On the global scale, there are now more than 27 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide. Today, India overtook Brazil as the country with the second highest number of confirmed infections. More than 4 million people in that country have become sick with the virus. Signs of a second wave are emerging in several European countries. In the UK, the government is placing the blame squarely on younger people who aren't following the rules. And as Redmond Shannon reports, a scandal with England's national soccer team suggests politicians might have a point.
India's metro trains are back on track after a 6-month shutdown. The government is trying to restart the economy, which shrank by an enormous 24% in the last quarter. But this reopening is happening as the number of new cases gets higher every day. In fact, the curve has been rising steadily since April.
When it started, we did not think it would last so long, and because I don't think any living doctor has seen such a long pandemic ever. India,
home to 1.3 billion people, has passed Brazil as the country with the second highest number of infections behind the US.
Some of our staffs are also getting affected with COVID because of physical exertion and not being able to take care of themselves.
Notably, India's death rate per capita is much lower than the US or Brazil. Experts are unsure why. A young population, inaccurate death data and exposure to previous viruses could be some of the reasons. A grim landmark in Spain on Monday too. More than 500,000 people there have now tested positive.
Los turistas llegan a Madrid
This woman complains that Spain has been allowing in tourists without any testing. Many of those travellers come from the UK, which is seeing a similar second wave, but also without a major spike in deaths.
The rise in the number of cases we've seen over the last few days is largely amongst younger people. Inevitably, it leads to older people catching it from them.
Young people are getting the blame, and it doesn't help that 2 young players on the England soccer team were thrown out of camp for reportedly breaking guidelines by meeting 2 women.
Obviously, they've been naive. We've dealt with it appropriately. There's responsibility on every age group to make sure that they play their part in keeping each other safe.
But in more encouraging news, Russia says the final phase 3 trials of its potentially promising Sputnik 5 vaccine will begin as early as this week. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.